Start recording on OBS and start recording on the mixer in 5, 4, 3.
Identifying as a mom, daughter, conservative, friend, parental rights activist, Republican Party delegate, lover of freedom, conspiracy theorist, mama bear, and force to be reckoned with, this is Raising Liberty with Lindsey Beckham. Good morning. I am so excited to be here this morning. Look, I'm getting up earlier, getting good at being here in the morning time. But second Friday in a row that we've been here in the morning. So I'm really excited today. I think that this is going to be a very informative conversation about some things that I think a lot of people don't realize are happening. I have a friend who actually I met her 2 years ago in Tampa, and she spoke, and I was so just taken aback and by her story and so impressed by her. And I thought, I've got to track this woman down and talk to her before I leave here. And I did. And I just, admire her so much for all the work that she's doing and using a personal story to change the future for children in her community and across the country. So I'm excited to have with us January Littlejohn. And she is going to, I guess, January 1st, can you just share your story? Just tell the listeners kind of what put you on this path, what made you so passionate about these issues. I know it's very personal for you.
Yeah, well, good morning, Lindsey, you and your audience. So at the height of COVID in 2020, our daughter was 13 at the time, and she came to us and told us she no longer felt like a girl. And this really took my husband and I by surprise. She had experienced no signs of gender dysphoria or discomfort over her sex leading up to this announcement. And what was happening at the time was she was in a friend group where 3 of the friends had started also suddenly identifying as transgender. And what you have to understand is back in 2020, we were really struggling to understand what was even happening with our daughter, because I'm a licensed mental health counselor. But when I was trained in the late 90s and early 2000s, this issue was non-existent. Clinicians would go their entire careers and never have a client that was experiencing any kind of discomfort over their sex. So it was very, in my mind, unlikely that 1, let alone 3 of her friends were identifying as some form of transgender. And the other thing that I quickly realized at the time was, historically, when we think of someone who is a transsexual, which is what it was formally referred to, it started in early childhood. These children were mostly male. It was typically some kind of precipitating event or trauma, and it was very rare. And so for those reasons, my husband and I were obviously concerned about what was happening with our daughter, as most parents were, because again, this was the height of COVID. So a lot of teens and adolescents were experiencing signs of depression, anxiety. There was so much that was unknown at the time. Their schedules were completely turned upside down because the schools were closed, even here in Florida. And so we had elicited the help of a mental health counselor. And this was May of 2020 when she initially came to us. Well, during that summer, things began to escalate with her. And so, this, we have found that this is pretty common with these girls that fall into these identities. And again, the idea of transgender today has no coherent meaning. It means whatever the child wants it to mean. So it doesn't just mean the child is identifying as the opposite sex. Mm-hmm. These children are being taught through gender ideology that they can choose to be a boy, girl, neither or both. And this so-called gender identity is completely separate from their biological sex. And so as we're trying to navigate what was happening with our daughter, seeing her deteriorate in real time and trying to understand even culturally what they were being taught, school started that fall. And so, as I had done so many times, because I was very involved in my children's school, I was even volunteer of the year at the middle school where this took place. I had reached out to a teacher, and it was via email because we were not allowed on school campus. And I let her know what was happening with our daughter, that we had elicited the help of a counselor, that we were not affirming the name and pronouns at home, and that I thought this was a direct relationship to the friend group that she happened to be in. A couple of weeks after school started, my daughter got into the car and said, "Mom, I had a meeting at school today, and they asked me which restroom I wanted to use." And that one event thrust us on this path that has completely uprooted and changed our lives forever.
Yeah, I'm sure that was shocking for you to hear. And I've heard you say before also, I think it goes even a step further than that, because the school asked your daughter how they should refer to her in front of you, almost as if they are helping hide something from the parents.
Yeah, so to make a very long story short, because this journey that we were on, it transpired for a year before we even considered getting legal help and filing the federal lawsuit that we ended up filing for a parental rights violation. So from the time that my daughter got into the car and told me she had a meeting, which I was shocked because my daughter also has diagnosed ADHD. So she has a 504 plan on file. Again, I'm a licensed counselor, so I know the rights that she's afforded under the ADA for the accommodations, but I also know that the school cannot implement any of those accommodations without my signature. And so
Right.
I was just really struggling to even process, number one, why would they be asking her that question? They know she's a girl. At the time, she was identifying as non-binary, which is made up. So I just really was having a hard time in understanding, number one, how they had a meeting with my 13-year-old child without notifying us or inviting us to attend this meeting. And number two, why they would be asking her which restroom she wanted to use. So I emailed the guidance counselor the minute we got home from school. And that same day, the guidance counselor and the assistant principal called me back and said, "Mrs. Littlejohn, we cannot give you any information about the meeting we had with your child. Your child is now protected by a non-discrimination law." So that to me was shocking. I didn't understand how my child was somehow protected by a law from me, her parent, when she was 13. So our only recourse was to contact the assistant superintendent, which we did, again, via email. And our communication between myself, the assistant superintendent, and my husband went back and forth for about 6 to 7 weeks. And we were finally given an in-person meeting with the middle school principal, and we were shown the 6-page transition plan that they completed with our daughter behind closed doors. There were 3 adults alone with my child. And this transition plan, anybody can look them up. It's from an organization called Gender Spectrum. The same plan is being used all over our country. And it wasn't just about names and pronouns. I naively thought when I reached out to the teacher that they would treat this like a nickname. I really didn't have a good handle yet on what was really happening with my child. Because again, in 2020, there was not a lot of information or resources like there is now,
Right.
thankfully. Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage,
Yes.
had just come out that summer, and I had not yet found that book until the fall. And so until that book really blew open the social contagion aspect of ROGD, which is referred to as rapid onset gender dysphoria. It's based on Dr. Lisa Littman's research in 2018. Parents really were feeling around in the dark, not knowing how to help their child, because when you Google this issue, especially back in 2020, but even now, the only information parents can find initially is affirm your child's identity or they're going to kill themselves.
Right.
And that is frightening and enough to bring any parent to their knees. But in this transition plan, it was much more than names and pronouns. They asked her, of course, which restroom and locker room she preferred to use. They ask her which sex she preferred to room with on overnight field trips. And then, like you said, they ask all of these children, how should we refer to you when speaking to your parents? Should we use your birth name and pronouns or the name you're going by at school? And this is to effectively deceive parents
Mhm.
that they have socially transitioned their child at the school, which is a medical psychosocial intervention they are grossly unqualified to be doing.
Right. And I love that you brought up Abigail Schreier because I was going to ask you that. She has her latest book, Bad Therapy, talks about the ways that we throw therapy at children sometimes, and it may not be exactly what they need. Do you think that as a counselor yourself, do you think that that's what your daughter needed when you got her that counseling?
So that's a great question. And I highly recommend Abigail's book, Bad Therapy, to every parent and, frankly, every clinician. As a therapist, it was a hard pill to swallow that the therapy that I was doing or once did, because I'm not currently practicing right now, even though I'm still licensed,
Mhm.
could have had unintentional consequences. We were not trained in that way. We were not trained that our therapy could, actually cause iatrogenic harm, which is what her whole book is about. But when you think about it, of course it could cause harm. Any intervention, even mental health interventions, carry potential risk. And so I think it was negligent and even still negligent for counseling programs to not be teaching their clinicians about iatrogenic harm that can be happening. The other thing that I will say and I hope the tide is turning on this because I 100% agree with Abigail. When I was trained back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were being taught this notion that therapy was good for everybody, that
Mhm.
it couldn't hurt you. Um, you saw it being very normalized on sitcoms and movies. They were really trying to remove the stigma of counseling and mental health in general, which I don't think is a bad thing because you do want people that are truly struggling to get help.
Right.
When it comes to children, that is completely different. And I 100% agree with Abigail Schreier that if a child has experienced true trauma, then yes, counseling may be appropriate. And I say may because not all children need counseling to get through trauma. That's just not true.
Yeah.
And so when we have parents like Abigail described, and I've seen this happen even here in Tallahassee, Florida, when we have parents keeping a therapist on retainer just to have someone for their child to talk to, that is an inappropriate use of counseling. And that is taking the place of real relationships with parents, friends, and other outside entities where you should be getting this kind of communication, not from a therapist. Therapists are not your friend. And like she also said, if a therapist is not talking about an endpoint of counseling when you sign up, that is a red flag. This should not be a free flow of communication for the rest of someone's life. And so I cannot speak enough about that book. I think it's critically important. And then, of course, she dives into much more than just counseling and the negative harm that it could be causing, especially for children and adolescents. But she also talks about the role of counseling in schools, which
Mhm.
does not get enough attention. Of course, we've got the issue with social emotional learning, and schools have gone so far outside their lane for so long that I don't even think they know where the lane is anymore.
Right. I agree completely. So after this meeting with the school, and I know you got an in-person meeting finally with the principal, what was your recourse, you and your husband? How did y'all proceed after that?
So there, of course, are aspects of the case that I cannot talk about still.
Right, right.
What people have to understand is these types of litigation cases, they take years. So again, initially, hiring an attorney was not even in my purview of what I was trying to get accomplished. I naively thought that if I take them Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, if I take them the research that shows the contagion aspect of these identities. It shows the harm that they are doing when they affirm these false identities. Because what we now know about social transition is that when you affirm a child in this identity, especially as a child or adolescent, you are solidifying that false identity in their mind. And for my daughter, and for many of these other kids, her identity crisis stemmed from a place of deep self-hatred. And so when you ask me, did my daughter need counseling at the time? The answer is yes, but not for the identity. She needed to address the root issues of why she was seeking that identity to escape herself. And so when the school socially transitions these kids, oftentimes they are affirming and solidifying in that child's mind. Number one, they're affirming the self-hate. They're saying, yes, you're right. Something is wrong with you. Your body is wrong. And they're affirming the idea that the only way to alleviate this pain is to become someone else. And that to me is the most tragic aspect of this whole thing, because that is not a message of positivity at all that we should be sending these children. You must become someone else, someone that you can never become, by the way, because this entire notion of being able to change your gender or sex is complete lie. It's complete nonsense. And then when you pull back the curtain of where social transition leads, most parents, including myself, are just absolutely horrified to learn that they are giving drugs and interventions to children that will leave them sterile. They are chemically castrating these children. They are removing the breast of young girls as young as 12 years old in our country. And I was completely horrified that this was the path that my daughter was now on. And I was terrified. It's a very isolating and scary place. It's a very lonely place for a parent to find themselves. And there is so much shame around this issue because you don't know who you can tell, who you can trust with your own child now. It was just a very, very horrible, scary time for me as a parent.
I can only imagine. And I was actually thinking about that. And I've heard you talk about the ways that you would interact with your daughter after this, or the reactions that you would give her. And I was thinking to myself, what would I do if this was me and one of my daughters came to me and said that? And I feel like I, this is, I don't know if I should even say this, but I feel like I would be angry with them and say, you're wrong. Like, this is not right. But you've talked about ways to talk to children and, like I said, react to this, to them saying something like this to you. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Like what is the right way, or what way did you come to realize was helpful in that situation?
That's such a great question. And, there is no rule book for parents to follow. But, I was lucky enough that God continued to open doors to resources that I need. And one of the best resources that I needed at the time was through a therapist her name is Sasha Ayed. She has an amazing parent coaching program. If you Google Inspired Teen Therapy, you will find it. But she has videos and, like kind of a message board to help parents navigate this issue. And so I made a lot of mistakes. And I tell parents now when I'm working one-on-one with them, it is never too late to walk any decision back. And so I think that's really important for parents to understand that we're not perfect, to give yourselves grace. And so, once I really fully understood that my child had been heavily indoctrinated into a false belief system, I started to think about and reframe this issue very differently. Number one, I realized I had time. And I had spoken to a lot of parents whose daughters had come upon this ideology either their first year in college, so they were already adults, or late in their high school career, or some parents didn't find out until late in the high school career. And by then, you just don't have a lot of time and control over the decisions that they make. You don't have a lot of time to kind of set healthy boundaries because the child may be already an adult. So I realized I had time, and I also realized I needed to reframe this issue so I was not operating from a place of fear.
Mhm.
And that's what I did when my daughter was talking very casually about puberty blockers and even surgeries, because they have rebranded all of this gender affirming care. Number one, to make it sound evidence based, which it's not. We know that absolutely 100% now from the CAS review and other systematic reviews that other countries have done. And then we also know that because of the WPATH files. Mia and Michael Schellenberger have done an incredible job exposing WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, that had set these bogus guidelines to begin with. And then our American medical associations adopted the bogus guidelines as evidence-based care. So, this entire thing is a medical scandal, and it's all built on quicksand, and it cannot fall soon enough in my mind.
I completely agree with you there as well. And we may be seeing, I hope that we're seeing the beginning of it to fall, because I'm sure, as you're well aware, the Biden administration and the U.S. Department of Education had this Title IX rewrite and these new guidelines that were set to go into effect August 1st, yesterday. And what we have seen are states fighting back, organizations fighting back, and getting injunctions to stop that from being able to happen. And so I just really am proud of all the attorney generals across the country who said, no, this is not okay. Proud of the organizations who have filed lawsuits to stop this from happening. Obviously, one of those organizations being Moms for Liberty, and having a very successful injunction awarded. So I'm hoping that we're seeing the beginning of this fall, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could just, finish my thought, because you asked me a great question and I got sidetracked, as I often do.
Yes,
Because
please do.
this beast of gender ideology, and you know this, Lindsey, there are so many arms to this monster.
Mhm.
We have the parental rights issue in schools. We have the infection of our medical and psychological institutions. We have the males and female spaces issue. We have the males and female sports issue. There's just so many aspects
Mhm.
to this monster, this beast. But back to your question about how we approach this with our daughter. They use the euphemisms like top surgery to disguise the fact that this is a radical double mastectomy that they are giving children. And so when I would hear my daughter talk about these interventions like they were nothing, I quickly realized that she did not understand, nor could she have them, she doesn't have the capacity to understand
Mhm.
the serious nature of some of these things that she was asking for. And this ideology really causes a deep disassociation from their bodies. And so for them, they really did see their bodies like Lego pieces that they could just remove or put back. And so when my daughter would talk about these things, I would think in my brain, okay, how would you respond if she was asking for a tattoo right now? How would you respond if she was asking for a tongue ring or a nose ring? And really the response should be no different. I understand that the serious nature is no different, but this is how I help parents reframe these so that you can find the language to calmly respond to this, because parents have no problem responding to, can I get a tattoo? Of course not. You're not old enough. You're absolutely going to regret that someday. And the same thing with body piercings or anything else that are just inappropriate at these ages. And so that's how you have to deal with this issue. You parent your children through this confusion by setting healthy boundaries that you would for any other identity crisis. And that's really critically important for parents to understand. Now, for parents who have children who may not fall prey to the ideology, but they have to understand your children are being trained to be allies. So even if they themselves aren't going to start identifying as transgender, they are being taught the only way to show kindness and compassion is to affirm this lie.
Right.
And so my message to parents, especially of young children, you have to be actively inoculating your children at every age, of course, in age appropriate ways, all along through their childhood and adolescence. It's critically important parents understand that. And if you don't know where to start, ask your adolescent or your teen questions. How do you feel about this? Right now, there are current events in the news, like what's happening with the Olympics and the boxing. Ask your child, what are your thoughts about this? And just wait. Don't give your opinion. Just listen to what your child is saying, and you will know very quickly how indoctrinated they are into this allyship of gender ideology.
Yeah, and I had not thought of it that way, so I'm so glad that you said that. What you brought up the Olympics. Watching that yesterday, I was just infuriated. I was angry, and I kind of backtracked last night and was reading about it and trying to figure out how this happened, what's going on. And I don't know if this person is actually transgender, but obviously they failed some sort of gender test. And, even if this person was someone who was born different, as such a very tiny, small amount of the population is, I feel like if they are showing that they have levels of testosterone, it's still not a fair fight. And so I'm appalled that we are allowing that to happen, you know, and with Riley Gaines, who's brought so much awareness to this, what happened with her? So what were your thoughts on the Olympics and the boxing yesterday when all this was breaking?
Well, first and foremost, this has been happening for a long time. And Riley Gaines is a hero. She, courage is contagious, and she has instilled so much courage in other athletes. And that's where I'm really proud of parents and athletes that are taking a stand, because I really feel if we had had the courage to do this 7 or 8 years ago, it wouldn't have got to this place. And kindness and compassion has been weaponized in this issue. Lies and propaganda have been pushed, like the suicide narrative, the abuse narrative. I heard over and over that the reason why we need to keep these social transitions, the psychiatric issue, secret from parents is because it could lead to abuse. Well, you can't paint all parents as abusive to their own children. I'm sorry, that is illegal. So in terms of the boxing issue, I think we need some clarity about these two athletes.
Mhm.
It sounds like they may have some disorders of sexual development. But even still, if you follow the work of Colin Wright and Zach Elliott is with the Paradox Institute, Colin Wright is with the Manhattan Institute, and I highly, highly recommend looking them up on Twitter or the internet, because they clearly explain what disorders of sexual development are and why those should not be used to justify the false idea that someone can be born in the wrong body. So I don't even say that someone is transgender, because that's not an accurate statement. No one is transgender. There are people that are trans identified, because this is an identity. When you say someone is transgender, it implies that there's something biological to this, which there is no evidence of that. And so a lot of people are really just, first of all, they're conflating transgender with being gay. And so they think that it's the same. It is not. And that's why you have organizations like the Gays Against Groomers heavily speaking out about the sexualization of children and about this issue in general. But disorders of sexual development should never be used to somehow legitimize that number one, that there's a third sex. That is not true.
Mhm.
And number two, again, that someone can be born in the wrong body. That is not true. So I don't know the specifics enough about these two athletes to speak, authoritatively about it. I think we're going to need to wait and see. It's very clear that they didn't pass regulations for the international boxing, but somehow they did for, the Olympic Committee. And a spokesperson from the Olympic Committee said something to the effect that they're going by what's on the passport. Well, that literally means nothing these days, because you can change your sex on a passport without even having any kind of surgical interventions. But let me be very clear. Even if you get surgical interventions to mimic the opposite sex, You are not that sex. Sex is binary. It can never, ever be changed. So I think it's falsifying records. We should have never allowed people to change their birth certificate. We should have never allowed to change their gender marker on their passports. And of course, it is completely ridiculous that we are offering a third option. That is ludicrous to me. I'm helping my daughter fill out college applications. And time and again, you go down for gender and they offer 3 to 5 options. That is ridiculous. And I'm looking forward to the day that we go back to biological reality. There are 2 sexes, male and female, and even within the disorders of sexual development, those can be categorized as male and female. So there is a lot of misinformation about these issues out there, but I highly encourage people look up videos from Colin Wright and Zach Elliott to get clarification on what disorders of sexual development really mean.
Right. We have a friend, Chris Elston, who he was so disturbed by what he saw happening just across the world, really. He's from Canada, but he started to walk around wearing a billboard and just start as a billboard, as a human billboard, and starting conversations with people and talking about these issues. And so you've done something I feel like is a little similar to that, because you have been such an advocate for those who are detransitioning. So tell us about your work with that.
Sure. And Chris posted something really important, and so did J.K. Rowling yesterday, to end on this boxing note. If someone is born with a disorder of sexual development, that is heartbreaking and tragic, and we should offer those people compassion. But we should not be allowing them to compete against females if their DNA makeup is actually male. Right. So that to me is very clear. Again, I don't know the circumstances of these 2 athletes. I think that it needs to be investigated. But my heart was broken yesterday seeing that Italian fighter throw in the towel after 46 seconds because she said she's never been hit that hard. That should not be happening. But Chris is a hero to me. I am so grateful for the work that he's done and is doing and having those conversations and putting himself at risk. He's been assaulted multiple times simply by wearing a sign that says children cannot consent to puberty blockers, which is 100% a true statement. And when I first started along this path, with our daughter, and we were concerned about what this meant for her future and where this was all going to lead, I learned about detransition. And those are some of the most heartbreaking stories you will ever read. And there's a Reddit detransition page. I think it's called Detrans. But anybody can go on there. And the posts are they are gut-wrenching. Because what happens is these vulnerable individuals, many of whom had severe psychiatric issues to begin with. Kira Bell is a prime example. She was one of my first heroes in this fight, who ended up filing a lawsuit in the UK to raise awareness of this. She had undergone a double mastectomy as a minor in the UK at the Tavistock Clinic, if I'm not mistaken. And
Chloe Cole has been a great advocate.
100%. Yep. Chloe Cole, of course. But Kira had a very traumatic history of sexual abuse, like many of these girls. And instead of addressing that trauma, she was fast-tracked on this path. And many of these girls, again, it's not that they want to be men. They want to opt out of being women. They think if I can change my body, then I'm not putting myself at risk of that kind of sexual abuse again. And so we are not helping these people at all. We're destroying their body because, as you're aware, when you put a young girl on high levels of testosterone like they're doing, it causes all kinds of medical complications. And then you give them irreversible surgeries that they can never come back from. Prisha Mosley is a tragic example that we're seeing now. Thankfully, her fertility was not impacted and she was able to get pregnant, but she was not able to breastfeed her child. Chloe Cole has no idea the state of her fertility because she was not just on testosterone, but she was on puberty blockers, also has undergone a double mastectomy, and has now experienced graft failure. And these young people are going to be dealing with medical complications for the rest of their lives. That is unconscionable and should never, ever have happened to these children.
Right. And not only that, but they can never have, a lot of them that have had the surgeries can never have a normal sexual relationship,
That's right.
or have orgasms. I mean, it's just there's so many things that are taken away from them because they were lied to.
Well, that's exactly right. And some of these medical complications, we're not even fully aware yet of what they're going to be experiencing because they were experimenting and are experimenting on these children in real time. And so when, we had a D-Trans Awareness Day, and I had wanted to participate in the kind of national event that year. I believe it was 2022, but I was on spring break with my family up in the Smoky Mountains. And so I ordered a sign from our duty, and I held up the sign when we were on vacation up in Tennessee. And that kind of thrust a year-long campaign that I did to increase awareness about detransition. So the sign was two-sided. It said, "It's time to talk about detransition." And then the other side was support detransitioners. And so every day for a year, I posted just flow of consciousness, something about our story, facts and figures about detransition and about medical interventions in general, facts about ROGD, facts about the complications for 365 days.
I love that. I love that. And you were able to have those conversations and share your knowledge with so many people that you would not have been able to do otherwise. Because of this sign, I just think it's so impressive that you've taken something that was so hurtful in your personal life and you're making a difference and helping people, even though I'm sure it's still difficult to talk about. January, in Florida where you are, I know that they passed a parental rights bill a few years ago. Now, that bill has become what is known as the Don't Say Gay bill, which is not what its intent was. Were you a part of that bill and getting that through the legislature?
Yes, actually, I was a huge part of it because at the time, what happened to our family was a prime example of why that law was necessary.
Mhm.
And so, again, going back to us trying to resolve this with the school district, I thought that if I bring them this information, I show them harm is being done, that'll be enough for them to change their policy. And it was actually called guidance, and they kept correcting me, and I was like, what? Why are they hung up on this policy versus guidance? And I realized it's because when you call something a policy, it's an official policy that has to go through school board approval. What had happened and what's happening all over the country in many of these school districts, and especially in Florida, is an activist group called Equality Florida had infiltrated schools starting back in 2016. And I'm not going to question their motives. I'm not saying all of it was nefarious. But what was nefarious was there was an intentional destruction of parental rights in terms of not notifying parents when their child was identifying as transgender.
Mhm.
And so that guidance was given to the schools. And in fact, when we were first shown the Leon County LGBTQ guide, which has now been rescinded, it was like a 38-page guide, and it was filled with misinformation. They were misinterpreting FERPA to make schools and parents believe that children have a right to privacy from parents. That is not the intention of FERPA at all, and that's not what the law states.
Right.
And so this whole guide was an intentional effort to, number one, push the false narrative that if you don't affirm these children and these false identities, they're all going to commit suicide, which we know there is no evidence of that. And in fact, there's evidence to the contrary that when these children and adolescents and adults are affirmed, the suicidality actually increases. And
Well, that's
so
the question that January, that they ask parents that question, and it makes me, it just gets under my skin. But they'll say, would you rather have a transgender daughter or a dead daughter? And I think that is just so wrong to say that to a parent.
well, and it's emotional blackmail. I mean, that what kind of question is that? What parent's going to answer? I mean, that's a no-win situation for a parent. And it's based on a lie. And so my heart breaks for the parents, especially like parents like Chloe Cole's parents.
Mhm.
They were not given accurate information. So of course they couldn't make informed decisions for their daughter's care. They were completely sold a bill of lies. And, we are so conditioned to trust doctors.
Right.
And this has destroyed the credibility of doctors. And I wish more doctors were speaking up because they don't realize how little faith parents like me now have in what they say. Because if you're going to affirm the lie that a child can be born wrong and affirm or even stay silent when children, even children on the autism spectrum, are being sterilized, that is unacceptable. This is a medical scandal of gigantic proportions, and doctors could have put a stop to this right away. That's why Dr. Etan Heim out of Texas is such a hero and has shown more courage than almost anybody I know in this fight. He's facing 10 years in prison right now for exposing that Texas Children's Hospital was continuing to do these interventions when they had said they were not.
Well, what a hero. That's a hero in my book. And I think we have the narrative, especially as Americans, that doctors are all knowing and they always want the best because they are taught to do no harm. So that's what they're doing the opposite of some of these doctors. They're doing harm. And you are a part of an organization called Do No Harm. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm very grateful for the work that Do No Harm's doing. Dr. Stanley Goldfarb and Christina Rasmussen has done incredible work. It's a very new organization. It just started in 2022, but my goodness, they have accomplished so much in such a little time. And it really started in the DEI space. They noticed that there had been an infiltration of ideology and frankly discriminatory practices within the medical field and especially the medical schools. And so this was very alarming to Dr. Goldfarb. And so as they were working on exposing what was happening in that area of medicine and trying to make sure that we ended discrimination in medicine. I mean, what a novel concept, right? We shouldn't be treating patients based on race. All patients deserve the best, most evidence-based care, regardless of their gender, race, religion. That should never be a factor. Identity politics has no place in medicine. And so as they were working to do that, he continued to get the question, well, what are you going to do about what's happening with this whole gender affirming care? And, like many doctors, they don't really know a lot about it. And so Dr. Goldfarb took the time to look at the evidence, look at the treatments. I say treatments very loosely. These are not treatments. These are body destroying interventions. And he was horrified. And so he put together a team. I'm a part of that team. I'm a senior fellow parent advocate at Do No Harm. And you can go to donoharmmedicine.org under the tab Our Work and find the parent resource page that we have put together on gender ideology. It has all types of resources from podcasts to support groups to books to documentaries. We even have resources for therapists and doctors, as well as detransitioners. So it's a very comprehensive resource list. It's resources that not only my husband and I use to walk our daughter through this confusion, but there are newer resources, which is fantastic. Dr. Grossman's book, Lost in Transnation, is an excellent resource. There's a few other resources that therapists have now written to help parents walk their children on the other side of this confusion. Because what we definitively know is that if you don't social or medically transition a child, they are most likely to desist, which means to resolve their confusion on their own as they go through puberty. That's why stopping puberty is one of the worst things that you can do for one of these kids, because puberty is a natural remedy for the confusion. It's your body's way of telling you this is what you're supposed to be, this is who you are becoming. And we should be celebrating that in children, not condemning it or treating puberty as a disease to be avoided.
Right. So in Florida, where you are and your school district, what has changed? How are things now? Are they still doing things like they were doing with your daughter? Are they still attempting to hide things from parents? Or did the legislation that you are a part of put an end to that?
I think the legislation was a huge first step. So we first had the Parent Bill of Rights passed in 2021. Then we had the Parental Rights in Education, which is the bill that I testified at every single hearing for. I told my story. And you're right, Lindsay, telling my story does not get easier, but I would tell it a million times if it saves just one family from the hell that we had to walk through. Because what the school did, it created a huge wedge between us and our daughter. We were literally the only ones in her life trying to keep her on a path of becoming an adult with her body whole and intact. It was like living in the twilight zone for her to be celebrated and clapped along a path that would have caused irreversible medical harm to her. It was just unfathomable. But I had to pull all three of my children from public school. So, other than things that I hear or things that are reported, I don't have a good knowledge or account of what's happening. I do know that the vast majority of teachers are not on board with this ideology. They do not want it. But we still have a couple of school board members, at least two that I'm aware of, who fully buy in to gender identity ideology and the idea that children are born in the wrong body and that we must affirm them in these psychiatric issues. And one thing that I've talked about before is it's very similar to affirming someone with anorexia. That would be unthinkable to do.
Mhm.
So it's still beyond my understanding how we got to this point where we thought that the right thing, the compassionate thing to do was to affirm someone into believing a lie. And that to me is just still it's unforgivable. And I'm ashamed of my profession that this is the direction that they've gone. I do know there are still some activist teachers. I've seen things on TikTok. I've seen them post on social media, especially after the law was passed, that regardless of the law, they would informally affirm children at school. So I think parents still have to be very careful. If your child is in public school, even in Florida, I think that you need to have direct conversations with teachers and ask them what their stance is on this issue. And if you're not satisfied with the response, either pull your child from that class or pull your child from the school. That was something that I learned the hard way. I was, initially when this happened with my daughter, we did try to put her in a different school. It was the height of COVID, and we were turned away by two different schools, and it was devastating. Looking back, I would have pulled her immediately and homeschooled her, but hindsight is 2020.
Right. When I first heard you speak in Tampa a few years ago, you showed a picture of a genderbread man, and then there was a gender unicorn, and then here recently I saw a picture that was it was like a sliding scale, and on one end was Barbie and
Mhm.
the other end was G.I. Joe, and it shocked me because they
Yeah.
are clearly targeting young children and giving them these ideas. There should be no reason for anyone to even make diagrams like that. It just absolutely sickens me.
No, of course not, Lindsay. And there are so many graphics like the one that you're describing. People can Google genderbread man, um, gender unicorn. There's an astronaut version. There's a snowman version from the Human Rights Campaign. There is, I even saw recently a teddy bear version, and it's all based on the same lie that sex is our sex organs, but our gender is in our mind, and these things are completely separate. And it's very confusing to young children. And of course, these are being directly marketed to young children. And just so you know, all of these gender identities, these made up gender identities, they all have their own flags and colors. And so it's very appealing and enticing to children, especially children that are looking for a sense of belonging. And that was exactly where my daughter fell prey to all of this. With her ADHD, it was difficult for her to make and maintain friends. And so a lot of these kids fall into these friend groups that are obsessed with LGBT identities. They fall into the GSA club, which used to be the Gay Straight Alliance. It's now the Gender Sexuality Alliance. And the graph that you're referring to with the Barbie and the G.I. Joe, they're falsely telling, that's from a UK organization called Mermaids, by the way, but they're falsely telling children that sex is a spectrum, when that is completely inaccurate. Sex is binary. What is a spectrum is expression. Mm-hmm. Girls can be as feminine or masculine as they choose to be, but that does not change their sex. So this entire ideology, not only is it a lie, but it's very regressive, because we are telling little boys that want to play with Barbie and like the color pink that they are not boys. They're actually girls trapped in a boy body. And we're telling little girls that are basically tomboys that prefer more, masculine sports or activities or toys, that they're not really girls. This is absurd. Just as Chris Elston always says, there is no right way to be a boy or a girl. And the fact that we are telling them that they could be born wrong because of toy preferences is completely ridiculous.
Yeah, I was telling someone the other day, I came in and my two boys, I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they were playing with my 7-year-old's twin sister's play makeup. And my first thought was not, let me call someone to cut your penis off. It's mind-boggling that we've gotten to that point, and that this has been pushed so far down everyone's throats that you think that you can't speak out against it, or you're going to be called a transphobe, or you're going to, like you said, they make it seem like you're not a kind person if you speak out that this is a lie, but it absolutely is.
No, it is not compassionate to affirm a lie. And we have got to be able to stand firm in the truth while also showing these people that are truly suffering compassion and love. But we need to get away from the lie that it is kind or compassionate to affirm this, because that is just 100% wrong. And, when I was going through this with my daughter, it would have been a lot easier to affirm the lie, right? It would have been a lot easier to not stand our ground and keep her tethered to reality when everybody else, including the culture, was willing to affirm the lie. But something that a detransitioner said always stuck with me, and her name is Laura Beth Smaltz. It was Laura Beth Perry at the time. You can research it. But she was in a documentary, and in the bonus features of In His Image, she said, when you get tired of living the lie, you don't turn to those who are willing to lie to you. You turn to those who are willing to tell you the truth, even when you didn't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. And so in my darkest moments, in the moments where I just was so desperate and was ready to give up, I clung to her words, because I knew if I gave in and affirmed the lie with my daughter, it was over.
Yeah.
It was over. We were going to lose her. And she was going to lose herself. And so
right,
I clung to Laura's words, and I just knew in my heart that this was all a lie, and that I had to be strong for my daughter. I had to parent her through this. And, I'm so grateful for the parents that paved the way before me. I'm grateful to Dr. Littman, who was brave enough to do the research that led to, the coined term ROGD. I'm grateful to Abigail Schreier. And there were a lot of parents that were severely persecuted before me, even back in 2018, because the Heritage Foundation they were doing these panels. You know, you had Walt Heyer speak out. You had Walt Heyer saying very clearly, he's also an adult male detransitioner. He was saying very clearly back in 2018 that we are manufacturing transgender children. And what he meant by that is just what those gender unicorn and all those graphics are doing, Lindsay. We are creating confusion in children that otherwise would have not been confused, because children look to the adults in their life to make sense of the world. They look to the adults to tell them the truth. And so it's critically important that parents and teachers recognize that, and they recognize that responsibility, because we still have, you know, not just the gender unicorn graphics and this, you know, ideology being pushed in SEL programs, sex ed programs, but you've got books. If you look up Bye Bye Binary, this is a picture card book for babies. And the kind of lies that are being pushed in these books, and unfortunately, like even here in Florida, it is not against the law to have a book like I Am Jazz in the school library that clearly states when you're born, doctors make a guess at your gender, and sometimes they guess wrong. That's what they're teaching children. Sex, and even the term sex assigned at birth, even that is activist language. Sex is not arbitrarily assigned. Doctors don't just make a guess, like, I wonder what this baby is. No, sex is observed, and it can even be observed even before birth in the womb. Sex begins at conception. And so activists have really manipulated truth into something that's not. Children are being falsely told that sex is not binary. It's just all so confusing, and it's a lie. And these same lies have infiltrated the medical field and the psychiatric field. There is a pediatrician here in Tallahassee, Florida, who said on an Instagram post that up until puberty, children's bodies are a blank slate. Think about that. That is a pediatrician. He's also the same pediatrician in an Equality Florida live Zoom that said, it's amazing what children will tell you when you get the parents to leave the room.
It's just sick. It's just sickening to me. Absolutely sickening. I was really proud to see Elon Musk speak out, and it takes courage, and it really does. And so I applaud you for all the work that you've done. And then I was proud to see him step up and say that he will do everything within his power to end this nonsense. So January, tell us what, as we're winding down, tell us what's next for you. What are your plans?
Well, I'm going to keep helping parents, because that's really where my heart is. And so if any parents are out there that are, struggling with this issue, or just want information on how to inoculate your own children, you can reach out to me through donoharmmedicine.org. Just fill out a contact information page and tell them you want to be in communication with me. But right now we have momentum, Lindsay, but what we need is courage. We are not going to end this without courage. And that looks different for different people. You don't have to do what I'm doing. You can simply have conversations with your neighbors, with your teachers, with your school board members, with your legislators, especially in the states that are still really hijacked by this ideology. And so have conversations with your pastors. If you go to childparentrights.org, we have created an incredible guide for parents and churches, so that you can educate your church on what is happening and how best to protect those kids. Because if the church is not willing to stand in the gap between this evil ideology and their children in the church, what hope do we have? We have got to get pastors and churches off the sidelines, stop being scared to talk about the issue, and certainly don't be scared to tell God's truth about this. Because whether you're coming from a Judeo-Christian perspective or an evolutionary biologist perspective like Colin Wright, there's only one reality and one truth, and it's not transgenderism.
I completely agree. January, thank you so much for all that you're doing for parents everywhere and for these detransitioners. I admire you. I respect you. I can't say enough how thankful I am as a mom and a parent that you're out there on the grounds and talking to people and telling your story and letting people know what's going on. I get told so many times that we are a red state in Mississippi and that stuff's not happening here. And I want to scream because yes, it is. And I see it. I see it happening. And so
Yeah.
I admire you and your courage, and I'm so thankful that you're doing what you're doing. And thank you so much for coming and telling your story on the podcast today so that more people are able to know what is happening and what they can do about it. Thank you so
Lynn,
much.
thank you so much for having me. You're one of my many heroes. And if I could just give one more gender resource, it's
Yes, yes.
gendertoolkit.com. Now that we're coming into school starting, this is a fantastic resource, gendertoolkit.com from Restore Childhood. This is very evidence-based information you can take to the teacher, you can take to the principal, you can take to your superintendent. And of course, Moms for Liberty has excellent resources as well. And I'm just so excited about the direction we're going. I'm grateful for you and, of course, Elon Musk for increasing awareness of the truth. And we are going to win this war on our children.
Real quick, I wanted to ask you one thing I just thought about. I have seen some schools who have sent home some forms with students or flyers that are advocating for websites such as is it Travis? Is that what I'm thinking of?
Trevor Project.
Trevor. So are you seeing that happen a lot, or what can parents do? How can they be on the lookout for things like that? Because I was very disturbed by that.
Yeah, if you go to organizations like Courage is a Habit is a great resource. They're going to give you keywords to look for. So if you see things in your school like inclusivity, of course, if you've got some kind of DEI coordinator, if you're seeing words like intersectionality, you need to be aware that gender ideology is already in your schools. That's why having one-on-one conversations with the teacher is going to tell you a lot that you need to know. The Trevor Project, it may have started as, with good intentions. It was meant to reduce suicide for gay adolescents. That is no longer what that organization is. This is an activist organization that pushes gender ideology onto young children. Of course, there's no safeguarding as to how young a child can be to get on that website. And it is absolutely disgusting that school districts are pushing this as a resource because they have something called the Trevor Space. And it's designed for children ages 13 to 24, I think. But if you go on there, there's a quick escape that tells children how to quickly get out of it so an adult will not see what you're doing. And they can talk one-on-one privately with an adult to explore their gender. This is 100% grooming behavior. We are destabilizing these children's identities and, frankly, making it much easier to groom them, just like what happened with Sage out in Virginia, who was trafficked after she was socially transitioned behind the backs of her grandparents. And then that thrust that poor child on a wave of harm. You could read her story online. It is absolutely horrific. Her name it's Sage. They try to pass Sage's Law in Virginia. But parents need to understand, if a school is pushing the Trevor Project as a resource, you've got a big problem in that school. That is not a healthy resource. It is not appropriate for children to be on there in any way, shape, or form. Any resource pushing the idea that a child can be born wrong and affirming that idea is harmful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, January. I just adore you. I appreciate you so much for all you're doing, and you're just a wealth of knowledge on this issue. And I cannot thank you enough.
Well, I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thank you so much for having me, Lindsey.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, and we are going to talk about our sponsor for today real quick. So, do you have this? The Yerkron Law Firm. Let's see. So Sean Yerkeron has he's an attorney, and he specializes in criminal defense. He does a lot of DUI work, and he He writes these ads, and they're quite funny. He says, "If you're involved in a deep state government conspiracy and don't know where to turn, we," because he likes to call me a conspiracy theorist, but which, I guess that fits the bill. We here at the Yerkeron Law Firm are here to help. So Sean has practiced law in Mississippi for 19 years, with over a decade of that being a prosecutor in Hinds County and at the Mississippi Attorney General's office. And he has the experience to handle any situation that you may have gotten yourself into. So you can call or text him at 601-906-9094. You can find him on his Facebook page, or you can find him at onetextlaw.com. And remember, just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty. So y'all give Sean a call if you need his expert law advice when it comes to any type of criminal defense. And all right. Thank you guys so much for listening today. I hope that you were able to take what January said and use those resources to know what's going on in your schools where you are, because I promise you it's everywhere. And we've just got to be so diligent as parents to make sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to protect our children. So y'all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.